2 years ago, I found what I believed was the perfect home in Oak Ridge Estates, a picturesque suburban neighborhood with tree-lined streets and immaculate landscaping. After decades of apartment living and saving every spare dollar, my wife Alina and I were finally homeowners. The houses all looked like they belonged in a magazine, with perfectly trimmed hedges and coordinated mailboxes. Children played safely in cul-de-sacs while neighbors chatted over white picket fences. It seemed like the American dream incarnate. Our daughter Samantha was thrilled for us when we FaceTimed her with the news. "It looks beautiful, Dad," she said from her military base, where she works as a trainer for Navy SEALs. "I cannot wait to visit when I get leave." Samantha had always been the tough one in the family, joining the Navy right after college and quickly distinguishing herself with her discipline and tactical knowledge. Though she never became a SEAL herself, as women were not eligible during her early career, she had earned the respect of the elite warriors she now trained in survival and combat skills. Alina and I settled into our new routine easily. We hosted a small housewarming barbecue and met several neighbors who welcomed us warmly. The Johnsons from across the street brought a homemade pie. The elderly couple next door gifted us with gardening tools. Everyone seemed genuinely friendly, though many conversations eventually included some mention of making sure you read the HOA guidelines. The Homeowners Association rulebook was indeed substantial, a spiral-bound document detailing everything from acceptable exterior paint colors to the maximum height of lawn ornaments. "It keeps property values high," explained Margaret from 2 doors down, as if reciting a community mantra. The monthly fee seemed reasonable for the maintained common areas and security patrols, so we did not think much of it. That changed 3 weeks after moving in when I first encountered Gerald Hoffman, the HOA security officer. I was planting flowers along our front walkway when a shadow fell across the garden bed. I looked up to see a man in his 50s wearing what resembled a police uniform, though with Oak Ridge Estates security emblazoned where a police badge would be. His belt carried a flashlight, pepper spray, and what looked like handcuffs. "Good afternoon, resident," he said, not bothering to ask my name despite the fact I had introduced myself at the community welcome mixer. "Just conducting my daily patrol. I notice your flowers there are not on the approved vegetation list for front yards." He pulled out a clipboard and began writing. "This is just a warning, but you will need to remove these by tomorrow and replace them with approved species." I was too stunned to argue. The flowers were simple marigolds, hardly exotic or inappropriate, but I nodded politely, not wanting to make waves in our new community. I did not realize there was a specific list. "Could you point me to it in the guidelines?" Gerald looked down at me through mirrored sunglasses. "Page 47, Section 12. Subsection C, I suggest you familiarize yourself with all regulations to avoid future violations." He tore off a yellow copy of the warning and handed it to me before continuing his patrol, posture rigid as if he were patrolling a military base rather than a peaceful suburb. That night, Alina and I laughed about the encounter as we pored through the handbook to find the mysterious flower regulation. "He seems to take his job very seriously," Alina said, finally locating the approved plant list. "But I suppose someone has to enforce the rules." I agreed, though something about his demeanor left me uneasy. Still, we were enjoying our new home too much to let one overzealous HOA officer dampen our spirits. We received a text from Samantha with a rare bit of good news. She had secured a week of leave and would be visiting us in 3 months. We marked the calendar with excitement, looking forward to showing her our new home. Little did I know that Gerald Hoffman would soon become much more than an annoyance, and that his confrontation with my daughter would transform our peaceful suburban existence into a nightmare, and eventually, a battle for justice that would divide and then rebuild our entire community. The weeks following my first encounter with Gerald turned our suburban dream into an exercise in frustration. What began as a single warning about unapproved flowers escalated into a barrage of violation notices for increasingly trivial matters. Our mailbox was apparently 2 inches taller than regulation. The wind chimes on our back porch exceeded the allowed decibel level. The welcome mat at our front door featured unauthorized colors. Each violation came with a fine starting small, but growing with each alleged infraction. I collected these notices in a folder, documenting each with photographs and notes. Alina suggested we attend the monthly HOA board meeting to address our concerns. There must be some misunderstanding, she said optimistically. No one else seems to be getting this many citations. The board meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a building that resembled a small colonial mansion with columns and a chandelier in the foyer. About 20 homeowners sat in neat rows of folding chairs facing a long table where 5 board members presided like judges. I noticed Gerald standing at attention near the door, clipboard in hand, watching the proceedings with evident satisfaction. When the floor opened for resident concerns, I approached the microphone with my folder of citations. My name is Robert Thompson from 1487 Oak Ridge Lane. My wife and I moved in 2 months ago and have received 14 violation notices, many for issues that other homes in the neighborhood also have but do not seem to be cited for. The board president, a silver-haired man named Douglas Werner, barely looked up from his papers. Mr. Thompson, the HOA enforces rules equally for all residents. If you have received notices, it is because violations were observed. You can appeal specific citations in writing, but the board will not address all 14 at once. I tried again, but there seems to be a pattern of targeting our property specifically. Just yesterday, we received a citation for our trash can being visible from the street, when it was behind our fence and only visible if someone entered our property to look. Douglas glanced at Gerald, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Our security officer reports what he observes during his authorized patrols. The board stands by his assessments. Next resident, please. I returned to my seat, stunned by the dismissal. As we left the meeting, our neighbor Tim Johnson approached us in the parking lot. "Hey, I could not help overhearing your complaint in there. Gerald has a history of fixating on certain houses. 2 years ago, it was the Rodriguez family on Maple Court. Last year, the Patels on Highland Drive. Both families eventually moved." "Why would he target specific residents?" Alina asked. Tim looked around nervously. "No one knows for sure. Some say he dislikes any changes to the neighborhood. Others think he just enjoys the power. Whatever the reason, be careful around him. He takes his job way too seriously for someone who has never actually been in law enforcement." "Wait, he is not a real security professional?" I asked. "Not even close. He was a bank teller before retiring. The HOA hired him because he offered to do security patrols for half what a professional service would charge. But he acts like he is some kind of police officer." This information changed my perspective entirely. I began researching Gerald online and discovered he had been rejected from the police academy twice in his younger years. His social media was filled with posts about law enforcement and security, often posing with tactical gear that seemed excessive for a neighborhood patrol. Meanwhile, the surveillance of our home intensified. Gerard would park across the street, taking photos of our property at different times of day. I documented each instance, growing increasingly concerned about his obsessive behavior. Alina began to feel uncomfortable gardening alone in the front yard, feeling his eyes watching her every move. The situation reached a new level when I received a text message from Samantha. "Got some good news, Dad. Leave approved for next week instead of next month. Will arrive Tuesday morning. Cannot wait to see the new house. Love you both." I showed Alina the message, feeling a mix of excitement and concern. "Do you think we should warn her about Gerald?" I asked. Alina considered this. "Let us not ruin her first visit with neighborhood drama. Maybe things will calm down by then." But as I watched Gerald drive slowly past our house for the third time that day, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting the afternoon sun, I had a sinking feeling that our troubles were only beginning. Little did I know just how dangerous things would become when my daughter arrived. Samantha arrived early Tuesday morning, pulling into our driveway in her government-issued dark green SUV. Even in civilian clothes, jeans and a simple navy t-shirt, her military bearing was unmistakable. Her posture remained perfectly straight, her movements efficient and purposeful as she unloaded her duffel bag from the trunk. At 32, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who has earned respect in difficult circumstances. "The house is beautiful, Dad," she said, hugging me tightly before stepping back to admire the Tudor-style architecture. "You and Mom deserve this." Her eyes scanned the surroundings with the automatic situational awareness I had come to recognize in her over the years, a habit formed during her military career. Inside, Alina had prepared a welcome breakfast. As we sat eating pancakes, I noticed Samantha glancing periodically out the window. After the third time, she turned to me. "That guy in the uniform has driven by twice since I arrived. Is that normal?" I exchanged looks with Alina. "That would be Gerald, the HOA security officer I mentioned in my texts. He has been taking a special interest in our property lately." Samantha's expression remained neutral, but I saw the slight narrowing of her eyes that indicated her concern. What kind of security does an HOA need that would require that level of surveillance? I showed her the folder of violations we had collected. She flipped through them methodically, her face growing more serious with each page. "This is harassment, Dad. Have you documented the drive-bys, the photography, the selective enforcement?" "Yes, but the HOA board dismisses our complaints. They fully support him." Samantha closed the folder. "Well, I am here for a week. Let us just enjoy the time and not worry about neighborhood politics." We spent the next 2 days showing Samantha around town, deliberately avoiding extended time at the house during daylight hours to minimize encounters with Gerald. But on Thursday morning, I had a mandatory meeting at work that could not be rescheduled, and Alina had a doctor's appointment. Samantha assured us she would be fine alone, planning to wash her car and relax. I returned home 3 hours later to find police cars with flashing lights parked in front of our house. My heart pounded as I ran from my car toward the commotion. An officer stopped me at the edge of my own driveway. "Sir, this is an active scene. I need you to step back." "This is my house," I explained frantically. "My daughter is inside. What happened?" Before the officer could answer, I spotted Samantha sitting on our front steps, a blanket around her shoulders despite the warm day. Her face was composed, but I recognized the controlled expression she wore when managing stress. A detective was interviewing her while a police photographer documented something on our driveway. "Dad," Samantha called when she saw me. The detective allowed me through, and I rushed to her side. "What happened? Are you hurt?" I asked, scanning her for injuries. "I am physically fine," she replied with careful precision, the kind of response she would give after a mission. "Your HOA officer pulled a gun on me while I was washing my car." The words hit me like a physical blow. He did what? Samantha recounted the events in the detailed, chronological manner of someone giving an official report. She had been washing her government vehicle when Gerald pulled up and approached her, clipboard in hand. He demanded to know who she was and why she was using water during non-designated hours, a restriction that did not actually exist in our HOA rules. I identified myself as your daughter and a military personnel on leave, Samantha explained. He demanded to see my military ID and vehicle registration, claiming he needed to verify I was not an intruder. I explained that he had no authority to request government identification and suggested he contact you if he had concerns. This refusal apparently triggered something in Gerald. He returned to his vehicle and came back with a handgun held at his side. He stated that as head of neighborhood security, he had the authority to detain suspicious individuals to protect the community. When he raised the weapon and pointed it at me, I switched to threat management protocol. A chill ran through me at the matter-of-fact way she described having a gun pointed at her in our driveway. The neighbors saw this happening, she continued. Mrs. Johnson across the street began recording on her phone, and Mr. Parker next door called the police. I identified myself again as military personnel, kept my hands visible, and used de-escalation techniques until Gerald agreed to lower the weapon. The detective interviewing Samantha interrupted to ask if I was Robert Thompson, the homeowner. When I confirmed this, he explained that Gerald Hoffman had been arrested for assault with a deadly weapon and impersonating a security officer. We found the weapon was registered, but Mr. Hoffman has no permit to carry it concealed, nor does he have any professional security credentials despite his uniform and behavior. In the distance, I saw Gerald being placed in a police car, his face flushed with anger. Our peaceful neighborhood had transformed into a crime scene, with neighbors watching from their driveways and windows. The detective continued, "Your daughter handled this situation with remarkable composure. Based on witness statements and video evidence, she likely prevented this from becoming much worse." I looked at Samantha, suddenly seeing her not just as my daughter but as the trained professional she had become, someone who had faced down an armed threat on our driveway with the same calm precision she brought to her military duties. As the police continued processing the scene, I realized our suburban conflict had just escalated beyond anything I could have imagined, and that our lives in this neighborhood would never be the same. The detective asked us to walk him through exactly what happened during the confrontation. Samantha described the sequence of events with precision that impressed even the veteran law enforcement officers. I listened, both horrified and proud, as she recounted how she had managed the potentially deadly situation. When he pointed the weapon at me, I implemented immediate threat response procedures, Samantha explained. First priority was creating psychological stability in the encounter to prevent panic-driven actions. She had maintained direct eye contact with Gerald while keeping her hands clearly visible at chest level, palms forward. Her voice had remained deliberately calm and measured as she spoke to him. I stated clearly, "Sir, I am Samantha Thompson, daughter of Robert and Alina Thompson who own this residence. I am active military personnel on leave. Pointing a weapon at me is a federal offense. I am not making any threatening movements. I request you lower your weapon." Mrs. Johnson, our neighbor from across the street, had provided police with video evidence that confirmed Samantha's account. The footage showed Gerald's hand trembling slightly as he held the gun, his authority clearly shaken by her professional response. "He seemed surprised by my calm," Samantha continued. "I recognized the signs of someone who expected fear and compliance but received neither. That created cognitive dissonance he struggled to process." While maintaining eye contact, Samantha had slowly explained her military role, deliberately using terminology that would establish her legitimacy. I told him I serve as a training instructor for Naval Special Warfare Command. I explained that multiple neighbors were witnessing and recording the situation. I gave him a structured way to de-escalate without losing face. The detective nodded appreciatively. You gave him an out. Yes. I suggested he could lower the weapon and wait with me for homeowner verification, framing it as a proper security protocol rather than a retreat from his position. Mr. Parker, our elderly neighbor, had witnessed the entire confrontation from his front porch and called 911 immediately. That young lady was cool as ice, he told the officers. Never raised her voice, never made any sudden movements. Just talked to him like she was explaining directions to a lost tourist, all while he had that gun pointed right at her chest. The police bodycam footage showed what happened next. 3 patrol cars arriving with lights flashing, officers taking positions with their weapons drawn, and Gerald finally lowering his gun as the reality of his situation dawned on him. The officers had ordered him to place the weapon on the ground and step away from it, which he did with visible reluctance. When did you realize the seriousness of what was happening? The detective asked Samantha. I assessed it as a legitimate threat the moment he retrieved the weapon from his vehicle, she replied. His body language displayed agitation inconsistent with trained security personnel. His grip on the weapon was improper, suggesting limited firearms training. His pupils were dilated, and his breathing pattern irregular, indicators of adrenaline surge without compensatory training. The detective looked impressed. You noticed all that while he was pointing a gun at you? Samantha nodded matter-of-factly. Threat assessment becomes automatic after years of training. My primary concern was preventing actions born of panic or pride. Many dangerous situations escalate not because of initial intent, but because people do not know how to walk back from the edge once they reach it. As the police finished gathering evidence, more neighbors emerged from their homes, gathering in small clusters to discuss what had happened. Some approached us with expressions of shock and sympathy. Others watched from a distance, their faces unreadable. The detective closed his notebook. Based on witness statements and video evidence, this is a clear case of assault with a deadly weapon. Mr. Hoffman had no legal authority to detain, question, or certainly threaten anyone with a firearm. We will need formal statements from both of you at the station, but I want to commend you, Ms. Thompson. Your training and composure prevented what could have been a tragedy today. As the police cars began to depart, I put my arm around Samantha's shoulders. The neighborhood that had once seemed so perfect now felt alien and dangerous. But looking at my daughter, steady, focused, and undaunted, I felt a surge of determination. This was not the end of the story, but rather the beginning of our fight for justice and security in a place we had once called our dream home. The hours following the incident passed in a blur of police statements, concerned neighbors, and phone calls. Elena rushed home from her appointment, her face pale with shock and anger as I recounted what had happened. The 3 of us sat in our living room, the perfect suburban home now feeling like a fortress under siege as reporters gathered at the end of our driveway. I cannot believe this happened, Elena kept saying, her hands trembling as she made tea no one would drink. He pointed a gun at our daughter, in our own driveway. Samantha, still in crisis management mode, was the calmest among us. The immediate danger has passed, Mom. Now we need to focus on the next steps. Those next steps began the following morning when 2 detectives returned to our home with new information. Detective Rivera, a serious woman with keen eyes, spread files across our dining room table. We have been investigating Mr. Hoffman since yesterday's incident, and what we have found is disturbing. The investigation had revealed that Gerald Hoffman had a history of escalating behavior that the HOA board had systematically ignored or concealed. He had been hired 5 years ago without any background check, solely on the recommendation of board president Douglas Werner, who happened to be his brother-in-law. Mr. Hoffman has been involved in 3 previous incidents involving confrontations with residents, Detective Rivera explained. In each case, the board handled matters internally, usually resulting in the residents either falling in line with his demands or moving away. What was most shocking was the discovery that Gerald had been terminated from 2 previous security guard positions for excessive force and had been denied a concealed carry permit due to psychological evaluation concerns. None of this information had been disclosed to community residents. The HOA gave him a uniform, a title, and virtually unchecked authority, creating a dangerous situation that culminated in yesterday's armed confrontation, Detective Rivera concluded. As she spoke, Elena pointed toward our front window. "Look." A news van had parked across the street, a reporter standing in front of it with a microphone. On the screen of our muted television, I could see the headline scrolling across the bottom. HOA security officer arrested after pointing gun at Navy trainer. By evening, the story had gone viral. Samantha's military background and Gerald's fake authority created a narrative that captured public attention. Our phones rang constantly with calls from reporters seeking comments. Local veterans groups issued statements of support. The HOA board released a terse statement expressing concern about the incident, while emphasizing that Gerald had acted outside his authorized duties. This tepid response infuriated me. They are trying to distance themselves from him now, but they created this situation, I told Samantha as we watched the news coverage. They gave him that uniform, that authority, and ignored complaints about his behavior for years. "Document everything," Samantha advised, her military training evident in her methodical approach. "Every statement, every news report, every communication from the board. This is not just about one man with a gun. This is about systematic failure of governance." 3 days after the incident, the neighborhood itself began to fracture visibly. Some neighbors brought food and offered support, expressing outrage at what had happened. Mrs. Johnson provided copies of her video evidence for our records. Mr. Parker invited local veterans to stand in symbolic support on his lawn across from our house. Others, however, aligned with the board's position. Margaret from 2 doors down complained at an emergency HOA meeting that the overreaction to a security misunderstanding was damaging property values. Board members suggested that Samantha had escalated the situation by refusing to comply with security protocols. This victim-blaming approach sparked even deeper divisions. As I stood at our living room window watching neighbors argue on the sidewalk, Samantha joined me. "This was inevitable," she said quietly. "When power structures are challenged, people are forced to choose sides. Some will always choose the existing authority, no matter how corrupt, because change feels threatening." The investigation continued to uncover troubling information. The HOA had been notified in writing about Gerald's inappropriate behavior at least 12 times over 5 years. Board minutes revealed discussions about liability concerns, but no action taken. Most damning was an email from Douglas Werner to other board members stating that Gerald's enthusiastic approach to security was saving them thousands in professional security costs, and that resident complaints are a small price to pay. When this evidence became public through local news coverage, the narrative shifted dramatically. What had begun as a story about one man's dangerous overreach was evolving into an exposé of institutional corruption and negligence. "They knew," Alina said. Her initial fear now hardened into resolve as we reviewed the evidence. "They knew he was dangerous, and they did nothing because it saved them money." As the week progressed, we made a decision as a family. This was no longer just about seeking justice for one frightening incident. It was about exposing a system that had prioritized power and property values over people's safety. With Samantha's steady guidance and our growing community support, we prepared to take legal action not just against Gerald Hoffman, but against the entire HOA board that had enabled him. The perfect suburban dream had shattered completely, but in its place was growing something potentially more valuable, a movement for accountability and genuine community safety. The legal process began with separate tracks: criminal charges against Gerald Hoffman and a civil lawsuit against both Gerald and the HOA board. We retained Patricia Lawson, an attorney specializing in homeowners association disputes, who reviewed our evidence with growing indignation. "This is one of the most egregious cases of HOA negligence I have seen," Patricia told us during our initial consultation. "They created conditions for this incident through years of enablement and willful blindness." The criminal case proceeded quickly. Gerald was charged with assault with a deadly weapon, impersonating a security officer, and unlawful use of a firearm. The evidence against him was overwhelming, particularly with multiple video recordings and witness statements. He was released on bail pending trial but prohibited from entering Oak Ridge Estates. The civil case proved more complex and contentious. Our lawsuit alleged negligent hearing, failure to supervise, and creation of dangerous conditions. The HOA board responded by hiring an aggressive defense team that portrayed Gerald as a rogue actor whose behavior could not have been predicted. This legal battle spilled into every aspect of neighborhood life. The community that had once seemed so cohesive split into visible factions. Some neighbors placed "Support the Thompsons" signs on their lawns. Others displayed "Stand with the HOA" posters. The monthly HOA meetings, once sparsely attended, now overflowed with angry residents arguing from both sides. The most disturbing development came when the HOA board attempted to silence our supporters through intimidation. Residents who spoke publicly in our favor suddenly received violation notices for infractions that had been ignored for years. Tim Johnson, whose wife had recorded the crucial video evidence, was fined for unauthorized landscaping that had existed for a decade. "They are trying to crush dissent through financial penalties," I observed as we added these new actions to our growing legal file. Samantha, whose leave had been extended due to the ongoing legal proceedings, nodded grimly. Classic authoritarian response. When legitimate authority is challenged, illegitimate authority resorts to intimidation. The turning point in public opinion came during Samantha's deposition. Seated across from the HOA's attorneys, she testified with the calm precision that characterized her military career. The transcript was released to the public as part of the court proceedings. HOA attorney: "Ms. Thompson, would you not agree that someone washing an unfamiliar vehicle could reasonably be considered suspicious?" Samantha: "No, I would not agree. Washing a vehicle in a residential driveway during daylight hours is not inherently suspicious activity. Furthermore, Mr. Hoffman knew exactly who I was. He had been monitoring my parents' home for months and was aware I was visiting." HOA attorney: "If you had simply complied with his request for identification, perhaps the situation would not have escalated." Samantha, sir, I am going to explain something fundamental about security protocols. Real security professionals are trained extensively on appropriate escalation of force. Mr. Hoffman escalated from verbal questioning directly to deadly force, skipping multiple intervention steps. This indicates he had no professional training whatsoever. The HOA board armed an untrained individual with authority, a uniform resembling law enforcement, and tacit approval to harass residents. When that individual predictably misused that authority, the board bears direct responsibility. Her testimony, delivered with authoritative calm, was devastating to the HOA's defense. The local newspaper ran a front-page story with the headline, "Navy Trainer Exposes HOA Negligence in Gun Incident." As the legal proceedings continued, Patricia made a significant discovery. During the required disclosure process, board emails revealed that Gerald had been involved in a similar incident 2 years earlier, pointing his weapon at a teenage resident he claimed was trespassing in the community pool after hours. The board had concealed the incident by reaching a private settlement with the family, who subsequently moved away. This revelation transformed our case and public perception. What had been framed by some as an isolated incident was now clearly part of a pattern that the board had actively concealed. Several board members stopped defending their actions publicly as their legal position deteriorated. Throughout this period, our home became both a fortress and a headquarters for community organizing. Neighbors who had suffered under Gerald's petty tyranny came forward with their stories. Veterans groups offered support and publicity. Local politicians began raising questions about HOA regulations and oversight. Samantha coordinated these efforts with strategic precision, applying her military leadership training to civilian advocacy. In the military, we understand that systems matter more than individuals, she explained during a community meeting in our living room. Removing one bad actor does not solve the problem if the system that empowered them remains intact. As the case moved toward trial, our goal expanded beyond personal justice. We were fighting to transform the governance of our community and create accountability where none had existed before. The perfect suburban facade had been permanently shattered, revealing the rot beneath, but also creating an opportunity to build something stronger and more genuine in its place. 10 months after that terrifying moment in our driveway, justice arrived in stages. Gerald Hoffman accepted a plea deal in the criminal case, receiving a 3-year prison sentence with all but 8 months suspended, plus 5 years of probation and mandatory psychological counseling. He was permanently prohibited from working in any security capacity and forbidden from possessing firearms. Our civil case never reached trial. 2 weeks before the court date, with damaging evidence continuing to emerge during discovery, the HOA board agreed to a substantial settlement. The financial terms remained confidential, but the structural changes were made public. The entire board would resign, new elections would be held with independent oversight, and a professional management company would be hired to handle community governance. Most significantly, a resident oversight committee would be established with authority to review all security measures, financial decisions, and enforcement actions. The settlement also mandated transparency in all HOA operations, with meetings recorded and minutes published promptly. The day after the settlement was announced, Douglas Werner and 3 other board members put their homes up for sale. Their departures felt like the end of an era, the collapse of a power structure that had dominated neighborhood life for years. Spring arrived as the community began its healing process. New board elections brought fresh leadership, a diverse group of residents committed to transparent governance. Tim Johnson, whose wife's video had been crucial evidence, was elected board president. His first official act was to dismantle the security patrol system entirely, replacing it with professional security services for community events only. Samantha, who had extended her shore duty to see the legal process through, became an unexpected public figure. Veterans groups and homeowners associations across the state invited her to speak about proper security protocols and community governance. She developed a training program for HOA boards focusing on responsible authority and resident rights. The military teaches us that authority without accountability leads to abuse, she explained during one presentation. Communities deserve the same professional standards we demand in our armed forces. Alina and I faced a difficult decision about our future in Oak Ridge Estates. The house we had once seen as our dream home carried painful memories. For weeks, we discussed selling and starting fresh elsewhere. I went so far as to contact a real estate agent and begin looking at listings in other neighborhoods. The turning point came on a Saturday morning when our doorbell rang. We opened the door to find over 20 neighbors standing on our lawn, led by the Johnsons and Parkers. They presented us with a petition signed by most of the community, asking us to consider joining the new HOA board. "You fought for all of us," Mrs. Johnson said simply. "We need people who understand the importance of doing things right." That evening, Samantha offered her perspective as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset. "Running away is sometimes necessary for safety," she said. "But this community is no longer a threat to you. Now it needs rebuilding. That is a different kind of courage." Her words resonated deeply. 2 days later, I withdrew our home from the potential listings and accepted a position on the Resident Oversight Committee. Alina joined the Community Welcome team, focusing on creating genuine connections among neighbors beyond the superficial perfection that had once defined Oak Ridge Estates. The physical transformation of the neighborhood matched its governance changes. The rigid uniformity began giving way to thoughtful individuality. Gardens became more diverse. Children played more freely on lawns. The community center hosted regular forums where residents could voice concerns without fear of retaliation. Before returning to her military duties, Samantha helped establish a neighborhood emergency response team, training interested residents in basic safety protocols and community resilience. On her last day home, we worked together to install a little free library at the edge of our property, a symbol of shared resources and open communication. Standing in our driveway as Samantha packed her government vehicle to return to base, I reflected on the journey from that terrifying confrontation to this moment of community renewal. "I never imagined buying this house would lead to all of this," I told her. Samantha smiled, her military bearing softened by the satisfaction of a different kind of mission accomplished. "The best communities are not the ones that look perfect from the outside," she said. "They are the ones that face their problems honestly and grow stronger through challenge." As she drove away, I turned back toward our home, no longer the perfect suburban dream we had originally purchased, but something more valuable. A hard-won piece of a genuine community built on respect rather than rules, connection rather than control. The manicured facade had given way to something more authentic, just as surely as the false authority of a wannabe cop had crumbled in the face of true professionalism and courage. Some dreams, I realized, need to shatter before they can be rebuilt into something real.